Hi.
Hi.
Stats Report Week 6, welcome to Talkin' Giants. My name is Justin Penik. I appreciate you being here. So what we're going to be doing today is kind of abstract. I don't have a lot planned for this stats report because there's still a lot of things that are kind of up in the air. We went really knee-deep on the defense last week. Some of those same issues are still perpetuating themselves of dropping interceptions and not being able to make plays. So what we'll do on the defensive side of the ball today is we're going to look at some key playmakers on this Giants defense and guys that we expect a lot from. We're going to compare their 2020 and maybe some 2019 per game stats to some 2021 per game stats and compare and see what's kind of going on with some of our key playmakers. Defense side of the ball, offense side of the ball, I'm going to be talking a lot about philosophical things, and there is no explosive play report this week, spoiler alert, because the Giants did not produce a play of 20 plus yards, and I didn't feel like clipping up the three 15-plus yard plays, but there was a run that went for 14 yards of Devontae Booker. Kadarius Tony had like a 17-yard gain, so I didn't really feel like clipping that up. I mean, they don't really deserve it, so there is no explosive play report this week. No plays of 20-plus yards. And Kadarius Tony's good, so we'll talk about that too, and I have a little bit of a thing about the offense line. So that's basically what the stats report video is going to be today. But we're going to start off with, and we're going to do this every single week, I guess, from now on, odds for the number 1 pick in the 2022 NFL Draft and odds for a top 5 pick in the 2022 NFL Draft for the Giants. And this is their pick, not the Chicago Bears pick. For their pick, they have an 8.1% chance of getting the number 1 pick in the 2022 NFL Draft, according to Football Outsiders. And they have a 52.1% chance, according to Football Outsiders, at getting a top 5 pick. So as of right now, you flip a coin, the Giants have a top 5 pick, you flip a coin and it's tails, and the Giants don't have a top 5 pick. So no matter what, I'm not going to root to tank. I can't do it. I can't do it in my heart. We're still in the month of October. I mean, talk to me in November when, we're in a little bit of a different spot. But right now, I can't root to tank. But we could root to tank. Who we could root to tank is the Chicago Bears. And the Chicago Bears, good news for Giants fans, they have the second hardest remaining schedule in the National Football League, according to Football Outsiders. They do like DVOA stuff, the averages of the DVOA rankings of all those teams. They calculate that they have the second hardest schedule in the National Football League. I like that. I kind of like that. I'm hoping Chicago, they lose every single game from here on out. And according to Football Outsiders, they have a 7.1% chance of landing a top 5 pick, which will be the New York Football Giants' first-round pick this year. So the more that they lose, and I may even integrate this into the stats report every week, but I'll definitely try to do like a social media video of being like really sarcastic about the Chicago Bears and their overall chances this year and how they're doing and what their matchup is looking like this week, because frankly, what they do means almost just as much as what we do at this point in terms of winning and losing football games, because that first-round pick is very, very important coming up this April. So there you go. That's NFL draft odds, and there's a fly in my face. I want to kill it. Splat! I'm going to have some fun editing to do with that. I did not get the fly. But yeah, so we'll have some fun with talking about the draft and draft odds and stuff like that. And it's October, and it's really upsetting. So here's what I want to talk about with offense today. I want to talk about some philosophical things and using numbers and my brain, right? So I feel, whether it's under Joe Judge, Jason Garrett, and frankly just under Dave Gettleman in general, just hearing about the way that he talks about the game of football, which you can't always take what Dave Gettleman says as gospel, right? Because Dave Gettleman will talk about pass rush, and yet he'll go out and he'll prioritize the secondary, which I like, but at the same time, it's a team game, and the pass rush is just absolutely terrible. It's the thing that is most wrong with this team right now, in my opinion. It's just this lack of edge room is just pitiful. But neither here nor there. Hearing the way that Dave Gettleman talks about the game of football, and especially looking at his first move that he ever made in the NFL draft as GM was taking Saquon Barkley, I don't feel like this franchise values scoring points. I don't think they value it. They don't value scoring points. They don't value that it's an offensive league. And they don't value explosive pass plays as the main mechanism to get you to scoring points and therefore winning football games. So that's my big qualm, along with a lot of other things with this franchise right now. But one of the things that I was thinking about this week in terms of like, well, what do I want? What do I want the Giants to do in the future in terms of, GM, in terms of philosophy, in terms of coaching, in terms of scheme and people and philosophies that they want to adapt, people that they bring on. Let's look at this data in terms of points per drive. Top 10 teams in points per drive this year. Kansas City, Los Angeles Rams, Buffalo, Arizona, Dallas, Tampa Bay, Los Angeles Chargers, Baltimore Ravens, Cleveland Browns, and the Tennessee Titans. The teams with the 2 worst records in that ranking, in those top 10 rankings of points per drive, are the Kansas City Chiefs, who are number 1, and they're 3-3, which I don't think they're going to be 3-3 for long because they've played a lot of tough opponents. Their 3 losses have been to Baltimore and Buffalo so far this year, and I'm having trouble remembering who the 3rd loss was. So I think some wins are kind of on the horizon. And then Los Angeles, the Chargers, who are also top 10 in points scored, and then also the Cleveland Browns are 3-3, which they're decimated with injuries, and their defense has been kind of suspect as well. So the combined record of those 10 teams are 44-16. You don't need me to tell you that scoring points is correlated, and it's basically it's a causation of winning football games in the NFL. You don't need me to tell you that. But even though I don't need to tell you that scoring points is a successful way of winning in today's NFL, I feel like fans throughout the last couple years, especially during Dave Gettleman, we've fallen under this false fallacy of how to win in today's NFL by saying, if we can run the ball and if we can get the run game going, if we can control the clock, control time of possession, that will help out every single other facet of this team. When that's just flat out wrong, because we can't do it. The Giants can't do it. There's not a lot of NFL teams that do it. And even when you talk about, okay, the Tennessee Titans and the Baltimore Ravens, Tennessee Titans and the Baltimore Ravens are still producing explosive pass plays at a pretty good rate. They are. Ryan Tannehill really did help that Tennessee offense. And Ryan Tannehill's nothing great. But Ryan Tannehill coming in, running play action, throwing the ball down the field, really did help out that Titans offense. And I think it set up a pretty successful running game. So the Giants prioritizing, being in games that are 20-17 and just doing enough to win. Just doing enough to win in games, it is not working. And it is a flawed philosophical approach. I'm going to get to the explosive play data and how explosive plays, if you're in the top 10, you're going to win most of the time. You're going to win over 50% of the time. You're going to win over 60% of the time. But it's such a flawed philosophical approach, and us as fans, we've fallen for it. We've said, you want to know what? It can work like that. When no, you want to know what? Those teams that kind of run the ball like really well, they're like the exception. But even the teams that run the ball really well, they still throw the ball down the field. And I think that comes first. Being able to throw the ball down the field or just produce explosive plays, not even through throwing the ball down the field, having wide receivers that can create yards after the catch, that kind of stuff comes first in an offense. That leads you to scoring points before this running game and establishing the run game and winning time of possession. All of that comes first. And this approach that the Giants have had of we're just going to methodically move the ball down the field and then boom, you just accept field goals because you don't produce enough explosive plays because the game schedule and the game script, it's going to run out of time eventually. Drives are just going to stall. That approach is not working, and it is the approach of this head coach. Unfortunately, and frankly, he leaves me no other choice but to say it. It is the approach of this offense coordinator. It's been the approach of this offense coordinator since 2010, and it's the approach of this general manager, unfortunately, as well, because he leaves me no other choice but to believe that this is their approach. They just want to run a bunch of plays, and they don't care whether they score points or not. They don't care. It's losing football. Score points. The Giants in 2020, their ranking in points per drive was 29th. And then right now in 2021 points per drive, the Giants ranking is 25th. What's my point? What's my point in kind of talking about this? Well, as time goes on, you learn. Like I learn. We all learn. The more that we watch football, the more that what we see, especially our favorite team, the things that they do that work and the things that they do that do not work. You learn over time about what a team needs to do to be successful. I am not going to be sold on what this franchise is doing until they prioritize scoring points and they start doing it at an above average rate, and until they start producing explosive plays at an above average rate, which is exactly what my next point is going to be. You have a graphic that I'm showing right now that's showing the winning percentages of teams that finish in the top 10 in explosive play rate, the middle of the pack and then bottom 10 basically in explosive play rate. And you're seeing the winning percentage of those teams, and this is based off of 2020 data. Maybe I'll go back and I'll go further, and I'll continue to do that during the offseason and go back to 2019, 2018, 2017. For as long as far back Sharp Football Stats has been charting the explosive play rate, I'll chart the winning percentages. But it's more often than not that if you're producing explosive plays at a top 10 rate, you are winning over 60% of your games. Flat out. If you are scoring points in the NFL, you are winning. And I know this is like no shit Sherlock, but I am done with trying to find like the silver linings of, Giants defense, they could be a top 5 defense, and the Giants could still find a way to win 10 games this year, even if their offense is middle of the pack. No, this is an offensive league, and I've said this over and over again, and the reason why I'm bringing it up is just because I want it to be known, my line in the sand, with Dave Gettleman, with Joe Judge, with Jason Garrett, with Daniel Jones, blah, 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 until we have a team and an offense for the New York Football Giants that is producing points at an above-average rate on a per-drive basis and producing explosive pass plays, preferably pass plays, but I would like to be overall above average in that category too. A team that is producing explosive pass plays at an above-average rate, I am not going to believe in what this franchise is doing. I'm just not, flat out. Defense can do whatever they want. Defense can get back to that top 5, top 10. They were top 10 last year. Defense can get back to that top 10 range. If we can go out, we can draft Kayvon Thibodeau, if he doesn't go number 1, right? If we can go out, we could draft an edge rusher, that guy from Michigan. We go out, we can do whatever we want on the defense side of the ball, and I will root for that. I will root for taking an edge rusher. But until this franchise is starting to prove on the offense side of the ball that they cannot just move the ball, but score points and produce more explosive plays, I will not be behind anything that they do. I just won't. I won't believe in it. I'll be behind it. I won't believe it. They got to do it, and they got to prove it to me first. So that's where I kind of am with the offense, and in terms of evaluating Gettleman, evaluating Judge, and evaluating all these guys in terms of what could we possibly do with this franchise. I am going to be basing my takes and what I want them to do around that. And frankly, if you like me and if you like to listen to me, frankly, I kind of think you should too. So, like I said, explosive play report, not a single explosive play of 20-plus yards from this past weekend. That kind of stinks. So I'll give some other notes on the offensive side of the ball. So what I'm showing right now is a confusing graph, a graph that confuses me. So I want you to specifically look at the PFF pass block grade and the ESPN pass block win rate graph in terms of where the Giants are located. Now, people will use that, those stats, PFF passing grade, and then especially the ESPN pass block win rate or run block win rate, because it's a number. It's like, the higher the win rate, the better the unit is. The lower the number, 45%, 30%, the bad. It's a bad. That's a bad player. That's a bad unit, which I think that is such a simplistic and not intelligent way to look at, especially offensive line play. I think for defensive linemen, pass rush win rate, or the grade you can get from that, it's a lot easier to tell on the defensive side of the ball maybe who wins a rep in terms of pass rushing and then who loses a rep in terms of getting to the quarterback. That's a lot easier. So I'm more open to that. But pass blocking and run blocking, like, how do you tell what's a win? So you can see that graph and how the Giants are ranked bottom of the barrel in, both the PFF blocking grade, or pass blocking grade, and the ESPN pass block win rate. But the Giants and Daniel Jones right now, Daniel Jones is the 7th least pressured quarterback in the National Football League, according to Pro Football Reference. And Pro Football Reference, I like their pressure rate, and I like their pressure, how they measure pressures, because they don't overestimate. PFF overestimates pressures. I mean, a quarterback can drop back 35 times, and they can sometimes estimate that he's pressured on 25 of those attempts. In a league where you're getting rid of the ball in 2.5 seconds, a decent amount, I don't think a quarterback's being pressured 25 out of 35 times. So Pro Football Reference, they really I think they level the playing field in terms of how they evaluate pressures. So Daniel Jones is the 7th least pressured quarterback on a rate basis in the National Football League. But the Giants' offensive line, which granted, I know they're bad. I know Billy Price is not great. I know Wes Martin is bad. I know Nate Solder is terrible. But just take it with the grain of salt. That's what my point is. Take the the run block win rate, the pass block win rate, the PFF grades, I know everybody already does, but mainly for the ESPN offensive line metrics, just take it with a grain of salt. Because I still do feel like, not this past weekend against the Rams, but with especially at Andrew Thomas at left tackle, the Giants' offensive line was just, they were getting the job done. And it's largely because of Andrew Thomas, but it's going to really go downhill without Andrew Thomas, and you saw it with, the strip sack, the the first play of the game. Nate Solder allowed, and then the first play that basically Matt Parrott was in, he allowed like a strip sack too. So it's not good. Not good, but just, it's very confusing. I don't like the offensive line metrics that are out there currently right now. There needs to be a lot of work that needs to be done on them. One more note about the offensive side of the ball. I want to talk a little bit about Kadarius Tony, who, according to DVOA for wide receivers, defense value over average, which what that does for wide receivers and what DVOA basically does in general is it measures value. So value per play for wide receivers here. So this doesn't necessarily take into account that, Tony wasn't used. This isn't necessarily just a total value. It's kind of like a value per play type of deal. And Tony has been involved a little bit more often. Obviously, he left the first series of the Rams game. But right now, Kadarius Tony is 13th in the NFL in DVOA amongst wide receivers, right in front of Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Devontae Adams, DK Metcalf, and then right behind Amari Cooper. So that's very, very impressive. Where usually, you looked at like Sterling Shepard's season last year. Oh, very high catch rate. He's a good target for Daniel Jones, but he's still like, not even in the top 40, not even maybe in the top 50 in DVOA amongst wide receivers, which I don't know how I fully feel about DVOA for wide receivers. I'd rather look at yards after the catch and catch rate and yards per reception and things of that nature. But it's great to see that in a metric that tries to measure value on a per-play basis, that Kadarius Tony is ranked around some of the best in the National Football League, and that's not surprising because it's kind of matched what we've seen with our eyes, but it's great to have it backed up. He's also fifth in the National Football League in catch rate with 77%, so great. All right, let's wrap up here with moving on to the defense and talking about some defensive notes that I have. So right now, surprisingly, to my surprise, that's what the word surprisingly means, the Giants are 11th in the National Football League in forced turnover rate on defense. Now, I've talked about this almost every single week. I talked a lot about it last week. There are interceptions that are in the Giants' hands that are dropped every single week. And, lo and behold, there was a drop that I think Xavier McKinney had in the first half against the Rams. That, I'm not saying it could have changed the game, but it could have changed the game in that moment where, giving this offense, this pedestrian offense, an opportunity to score points is key. It's very, very key. And I know Xavier McKinney had 2 interceptions, but they were basically meaningless. But the one that did mean something that was in his hands, he wound up dropping. So every single week there are interceptions that is in this defense's hands that they just flat out drop. And they're 11th in the NFL in turnover rate per drive. Now, that definitely does incorporate the two garbage time interceptions that they had last week. But still, think about if the Giants actually came down with those interceptions that are in their hands every single week. They're top 5. They may even be top 3. Like, Logan Ryan dropped 2 against Atlanta. Adoree Jackson dropped 1 in the end zone against Atlanta. James Bradbury had an interception in his hands right before the end of the first half against Dallas. That would have made a difference in the game. So there's interceptions and there's missed opportunities that this defense has every single week to force turnovers, and a defense that allows a lot of points and allows a lot of yards, a way that you can make that look a little bit better is by forcing turnovers and giving your offense another opportunity. So not saying that all these turnovers that the Giants drop, it could change the outcome of games, but you never know. You never know. And usually they drop the interceptions when the game still matters and when the game is still close. It's not like they're dropping these interceptions when it's a 20-point deficit. So it does make a difference. This is a defense full of playmakers that doesn't make plays. And that's very, very frustrating. That guys have interceptions in their hands, and they're dropping them. So let's go to some per-game bases and per-game stats, comparing some players to their 2020 seasons and now to 2021. Leonard Williams, you see the graphic on the screen. Most notably, what I'm disappointed in Leonard Williams is simply the QB hit and the pressures. The sack is around the same. Tackle for loss. It's less all around the board. But I'm most disappointed in the QB hit and the pressure rate. Now, not having any kind of edge presence hurts because Leonard Williams, more attention is being devoted to him, whereas Azeez, Lorenzo Carter, O'Shane, no matter who is at edge, you could just put a tackle one-on-one with them and you know that they're going to be fine. But still, Leonard Williams is getting paid a lot of money, and he's getting paid a lot of money. I at least want to see the pressures and the QB hits stayed at somewhat of a consistent rate. If the sacks go down because you're getting double teamed and triple teamed at times, then sure. I mean, I'm okay with that. But if you're not producing the pressure and the QB hits on a consistent basis, that's a bad mark on my book. But I do still have a belief in Leonard Williams that he can pick it up. You know, he had a pretty solid game this past Sunday against the Rams. So Dexter Lawrence, on the other hand, not good. I mean, this was supposed to be the year that he was supposed to make the jump, right? No more Dalvin Tomlinson. You're going to be relied on more. Leonard Williams, it's going to be you and Leonard, man. It's going to be you and Leo. You're going to be the dynamic duo. And his production wasn't that great as a pass rusher to begin with, but it's even worse this year. And really seeing his downfall has been probably the most surprising thing about this defense this year. You maybe expected Bradbury to get a little bit worse. You maybe expected the unit to get a little worse overall, I guess, for sure. But you never expected Dexter Lawrence to take such a downward fall in year 3. Austin Johnson, you know, he's been the guy that's benefited from, I think, Leonard Williams getting double-teamed, Dexter Lawrence getting double-teamed, where even in non-pass rushing opportunities, or let me just say, even in non-downs where it's a passing down and Austin Johnson's in the game, he's feeding off of it, and his per-game basis and his per-game stats are a lot better than 2020, because simply, he didn't really get a lot of pass rushing opportunities last year. He didn't really get a lot of opportunities to get after the quarterback in general. He was in for a lot of the rushing downs, and you know, he wasn't in a lot in general in 2020, but in 2021 he's gotten it a little bit more, but still, he's not really in there when the Giants are in a passing situation, when they're facing a passing situation as a defense. So it's fun to see that Austin Johnson's having a good year. You know, he's been like low-key like the third or the fourth best player on the defense, which is kind of sad. Lorenzo Carter, you know, what is there to say? He's not good. He's not good. He does not deserve a new contract with the Giants unless it's literally like for, you know, like a minimum deal when you hit free agency, I guess. But I don't want him back. When you look at his 2020 per game stats, it wasn't great. It wasn't great. And I wasn't expecting the world from Lorenzo Carter, but what I was expecting was to at least replicate what he did in 2020, which was just being a good player. I mean, Lorenzo Carter was one of the guys that did put up good film in 2020, where he did set the edge. He played a little bit on the inside linebacker to help the run. He helped in that facet of the game, and I thought he would improve as a pass rusher a little bit, but clearly that's not the case. So that's Lorenzo Carter, hasn't really earned anything. O'Shane Ximines, you know, in 2020, you look at his per game stats. In 2020, he was getting limited opportunities, but you see a 3/4 of a QB hit per game and over a pressure. And that was the guy that was getting like 30 to 40% of the snaps. So I'm thinking to myself, well, you know, O'Shane, if he stays healthy, maybe he gets the opportunity to be the number 1 edge rusher across from Kyler Fackrell after Carter and Golden are traded. But just never happened. You know, he obviously got hurt, and this year, even with those same level of opportunities, he's digressed as well. Like he's not getting the pressure per game. He's not even, you know, he's not getting anywhere near the amount of QB hits that he had last year. Obviously, he didn't have any sacks last year, but O'Shane was a guy that was like, oh, you know, maybe the sneaky production was kind of there in the very, very limited reps that he had. But still, I mean, he's nobody. Nobody. I mean, he is nobody. I would even think about moving on from him this offseason. You know, if you have good replacements that are coming in at edge, and if you want to trot some guys out there with a little bit more promise than him. James Bradbury, the biggest thing for James Bradbury on a per-game basis that's different for me is the air yards per completion per game. You know, the air yards per game that he's allowing is almost double than what it was in 2020. And even though James Bradbury, you know, not really targeted deep down the field, but if you're allowing a lot of completions and you're allowing a lot of targets, that's not the biggest deal to me if you're not being targeted down the field and you're not allowing a lot of air yards. Well, that's a little bit different this year. He's being targeted deeper down the field, slightly, a little bit more, and when you flat out just allow more completions, that's also going to hurt you too. That's going to hurt you too overall. So you see that per game basis there. Adoree Jackson has been solid. You know, he hasn't been great, but I think Adoree Jackson has been the thing that has kept this defense somewhat afloat. I mean, imagine this defense without Adoree Jackson. For everybody that likes to say, oh, well, you know, I wish we would have kept Dalvin over Adoree Jackson. Well, imagine this pass defense without Adoree Jackson. Because Dalvin Tomlinson did not provide much as a pass rusher. Sure, the run defense would be better, great, but this is a passing league. You know you're going to watch these videos. You know you're going to get that narrative from me. It's not even a narrative. I think it's just a fact. So imagine what this defense would be without Adoree Jackson, especially when James Bradbury has regressed as much as he has. And the last two guys, Logan Ryan and Jabril Peppers. You know, Logan Ryan just flat out isn't making the same plays that he made last year. And Jabril Peppers isn't being used as much, but he's also struggling more in coverage, but he's also not being used like he was last year. So he's allowing a 90% completion rate, which is insane. But they were using him as like a slot corner last week when you have Xavier McKinney, who I think has like the skills to possibly be a slot corner situationally, Logan Ryan, who was a slot corner for years, and Julian Love, who was a corner in college and has the slot corner kind of skills. So what the Giants did when you have all those guys, you have 3 other better alternatives to play slot corner, they put Jabril Peppers in there against Cooper Kupp, one of the league's best slot wide receivers. It's just very head-scratching. So, Jabril Peppers isn't playing as well as he was last year, but he's also not playing in the box, and he's not playing as much. So it's just all a bad combination. So that's my little spiel about the defense side of the ball. Wanted to look at some key players and just show that, hey, it's player performance on the defense side of the ball, but then you look at a guy like Jabril Peppers, and it's like, well, that's more or less scheme. It's because they are doing things differently with how they're using safeties and how many guys they're putting in the box and how they're using a guy like Jabril Peppers, who was one of the team's best playmakers last year. And they're just choosing to use him in a different way, which is hurting. Because this is a defense full of playmakers, and they have no playmakers. All right, that's Stats Report. We will see you next week. Hopefully we have some more substantial things to talk about the actual game, but if I have to continue to go more broad and abstract and maybe talk some philosophical things, I will do that too. So see you next week. Thank you for watching. Peace. Go Blue. I hope.